Welcome to the Feel Better, Live Better podcast. Our goal is to provide you insightful conversations about all things health and wellness. We dive into the stories, science, strategies that help you optimize your well-being, physically, mental, and emotional health. Each episode features engaging discussions with health experts, real-life success stories, and practical advice to empower you on your wellness journey. Whether we're breaking down the latest medical advancements, exploring holistic health solutions, or chatting about everyday habits that make a difference, our goal is simple: to help you feel better and live better. Tune in for inspiring narratives, expert consultations, candid conversations that bring health to life, one talk at a time.
If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
Welcome to the Feel Better, Live Better podcast. My name is Kristi Fury, your host for today's episode. Thank you to Beyond Health for sponsoring this episode on today's podcast. We'll be talking with Dr. Gary Bowman, chiropractor and founder of Propel Health and Human Performance. We will be discussing proper movement and how it relates to Healthspan. I hope you enjoy this informative conversation.
Beyond Health is dedicated to helping patients achieve a life of health. Our passion at Beyond Health is transforming your health so you can live the very best life. Beyond Health can be your partner in your journey to optimal health.
Gary, welcome today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started your practice?
Thanks, Kristi. I appreciate the invite. I started my practice. I first moved to New Mexico with my wife and kids. We wanted to move down here to be a little closer to her parents. I had just left professional hockey, and I kind of want to take more of a consulting type role for athletic development, injury rehab, and performance. And so being new here, I started working with a couple doctors in the area. And then after a couple years, I just decided that I needed to go out on my own. And now I have a couple locations here in Albuquerque, and things are going pretty good so far.
Great. So let's get started. Today, my focus is to talk about chiropractic care, how it relates to overall health and longevity for our clients. So one of my first questions is, how do you see chiropractic care contributing to healthy aging and health span?
Sure. I think, one of the main things that's important for healthy aging is the ability to move your body. And as we know, pain is a huge disruptor of both sleep health and just general activity levels. So I see the profession of chiropractic as a keystone in the ability to help our patients achieve relatively pain-free movement as they age. Because as we both know, as soon as that body stops moving, metabolic processes slow down and just disease starts to set in.
Yes, exactly. And how do you approach a client, an athletic client, since I know that's definitely your area of interest, but to a client that comes to you that's overweight? Like, what's your approach? How do you help that client through pain?
Well, one of the first things that we find to be most valuable is really spending some time figuring out what's their pain generator. What's going on with them? Is it, a joint irritation? Is it some disc problem? Is it, some muscle dysfunction? Once we get them kind of figured out from that perspective, obviously there's a conversation about weight loss and activity, but for me, one of my favorite things to leverage is walking, just moving, getting your steps in, to be a little bit cliche, but even if it's small doses done multiple times a day, our first perspective is what can we do to get you moving more, and just work with the client to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, one of the things that always, if I have a patient that comes to me for the first time or even multiple times, and I know they're struggling with movement, I'm just start walking 20 minutes after every meal. That's such an important thing from a mitochondria, a muscle perspective, as far as driving that glucose into that muscle. Because if not, as Americans, most of we eat and we become even more sedentary after food. When that's the time to just be walking, not that we need a difficult workout or any kind of hard resistance at that point in time, but just simply movement. Fabulous. So I know one area of your interest is, spinal alignment, spinal health. So how does spinal alignment correlate with improved energy?
Well, one of the things is obviously the spine houses the nervous system. And when there's dysfunction within the nervous system, that can be manifested as many different issues. And so one of the things we believe as a core tenet of chiropractic is through the art of manipulation or joint mobilization, we can kind of improve that nervous system function. You know, there are so many things that happen at the level of the spine that don't even get to the brain. For example, you put your hand on a hot stove, you're going to take your hand off really quickly, and that's a quick process that happens at the level of the spine, not even all the way up to the brain. So if we can keep those segmental nerves moving better, we can have a better impact on where you feel your joints are in space. The term for that we call proprioception, like how you know where you're at in this world. And once you can kind of, feel more stable, more comfortable, then activity levels can then increase. But if you don't feel good in your own skin, whether that be from a comfort perspective on just dizziness or joint mobility, you're less apt to move. And back to our previous statement, we got to get our clients moving.
Yep. And then how do you see, the three things everybody's always asking me, like, what's the latest biohacking? How can I improve, overall health span? And, I said, there's a lot of things we can layer up with, but the basics is diet, exercise, and sleep. So how do you see sleep when you fix someone's spine? How does that correlate to sleep?
That's a great question. So I have a story, if that's okay to tell.
Absolutely.
So I've just working with a gentleman recently. He's an avid skier. He took a awesome, backcountry powder trip up to Canada, and he herniated a disc. He got cold, coughing, and hacking, and every single night, pain was waking him up every 2 hours. So his sleep was just absolutely disrupted from the pain. Yeah. And so one of the side benefits of getting him feeling better was he was sleeping longer through the night. And I honestly think that is an underappreciated disruptor of sleep is pain. Night pain. Yes.
No. So what did you do for that client?
Oh, I'm glad you asked.
As far as, just because I'm curious, because, so many clients that we see, they have impact injuries from head to obviously all spinal, limb impact injuries. But so I'm just kind of curious.
So what we take our clients through is what's called a mechanical evaluation. And what that means to me is I watch how they move, what are their pain triggers, and conversely, what are these positions of relief. And so in this gentleman's case, the triggers to pain were sitting, forward bending, and his position of relief was leaning back or spinal extension is the term for that. So in this case, he kind of led me down that road because on the drive back from Canada, he had to roll up his jacket and put it behind his low back so that he could tolerate sitting. So he gave me these little bread crumbs of clues as to what I needed to kind of figure out there. So what we ended up deciding on was putting him through a series of spinal extension or back bends or cobra pose if you're a yogi. And what I ask my clients to do is, unfortunately, they got to do a lot of that. So he had to do at least 10 repetitions every 2 hours while he was awake. And over the course of 48 hours, the leg pain that he had resolved. He was able to sleep through the night, and he just had less sensitivity. And so from that point, once we've got the joints moving better, we progress into what we call motor patterning. So I needed to help him with some exercise to stabilize his spine and avoid compression-based injury. So classic core training type stuff. And then just recently, he's an avid rock climber. He just does a lot of stuff. He's a very active human. And so once we get those motor patterns down, we have to create endurance. He has to do those movements enough where they really settle into the nervous system. He has great access to those muscles when he needs them. And then beyond the endurance phase, then I got to get him a little bit stronger. And so from there, that's kind of the process that we have to take all clients through. It's not cookie cutter, but there are some general physiological changes we need to see to pursue health.
And how often would you see him? Once a week, twice a week? I mean, obviously if he was doing his homework at home, but how often did you see him?
So the first incident with the raging leg pain that he had, I followed up with him 2 days later just to make sure that the exercises were working, that they weren't making him worse. The worst thing in my clinic is when nothing happens at all. If I get someone worse, at least I know that I triggered something. There was a negative change, but there was a change. If there's nothing happening, I didn't diagnose appropriately, like what we're doing just isn't helping. In this man's case, 48 hours was all he needed to resolve the leg pain. And then I taught him the stabilization exercises. He was very proficient, taking videos, writing notes. So I was comfortable giving him 2 weeks to kind of work on that stuff. In some cases, if I'm just not getting through to the client, I might need to see them a little bit more. But my favorite thing in clinic is to empower my patients to know what to do at home. And so I don't really use a hefty treatment plan where I see my clients a couple days a week for multiple weeks. I really try to get them self-sufficient. And he was actually very thorough in that. Now, there are certain injuries, let's say post-op, where someone has had an ACL repair where they just have to be in the office. You know. But that case, they need my help. But as soon as I can remove myself personally from the equation and empower my patients to be more free to do it on their own, I look for that window and I try to give them a 2-week kind of buffer and make sure that they're comfortable doing that stuff.
Yeah, because I think some clients, because obviously, we don't take insurance at Beyond Health, and, you don't at Propel Health and Human Performance. And, so the cost is always sometimes a question that they will ask me. But, once a week, twice every 2 weeks, not bad at all.
No, not bad. And again, when your communication skills are on point, you let them know why we're doing what we're doing and trying to get that buy-in. I'm sure that's valuable for you too. You got to get your patients to participate.
100%. So what lifestyle habits do you see most commonly contributing to spinal misalignment and dysfunction?
Well, for sure, back to our previous comment, too much weight gain. If you put too much weight on the frame and it's just not designed to handle that, there's a host of problems that come along with that. With that, sedentary lifestyle is brutal in our world. People who don't move their body, they don't feed their joints the food that they need, essentially. But I would say those two things, poor nutrition, lack of movement is a lethal combination when it comes to chronic pain.
Yep. Well, and I always say, we all have an ideal set weight. We get sick or, disease states start setting or injuries when we're above that set point, but also below that set point. And it's important to stay where do you feel your best, not necessarily what is that number on the scale, but what does your body composition look like and how do you feel at that level? We use the InBody a lot at Beyond Health, helping us communicate to the patients, really looking for that muscle strength. Because as you and I both know, muscle is our biggest wealth, right? Oh, yeah. If we can keep that going, we know that client, that patient is going to have a healthy lifespan. When I'm looking at patients, I truly put them in my brain. I put them on a Healthspan kind of paradigm, right? And, I look at how close are you to wellness, not how close you are to sickness. And I want to constantly be moving that dial to the wellness. How important is movement and proper alignment in supporting the body's ability to repair? I'll dive a little bit deeper as far as from a cellular level, but so many, again, going back to the average American, we sit at a desk. Very few of us have a job that requires us to be physical. Even myself, yes, I get up a lot throughout the day, but I have a pretty sedentary job, unfortunately. So how does proper movement alignment support that body's health?
Yeah, well, hopefully I'm not stealing your thunder here, but really we look at mitochondrial function because at the cellular level, the body's ability to process nutrients, handle lactic acid buildup is really the definition of physical wellness, in my opinion. At the elite level with our athletes, we need that to function really high. But at this general population level, if there is poor cellular metabolism, it's very hard to get my clients through the endurance phase of rehabilitation to where they can tolerate the workload required to move the needle on whether that be weight loss or just movement tolerance in general. And so how that joint health comes into play is if the joints can't do what the exercise requires, there's no exercise happening. We can modify that a little bit, but we need to get our clients weight bearing. And sometimes weight bearing is a pain provoking process, and we have to figure out ways to, one, get the joint in a better position. Once that joint is in a better position, we have to get the pattern to look good, because if the movement is garbage, the joint's going to get chewed up. You know, whether that's through overloading through body weight or just poor mechanics in sport, it's not going to work. So we have to kind of teach them, you know, what the joints are supposed to do and create a corrective exercise plan that allows the joint to manifest its best movement. And then we got to do that a lot. And so that's really where I think the cellular side really is valuable in my profession as well.
No, and I think that's why you and I work so well together, and I truly appreciate our collaboration together I kind of consider us a team in a way.
Sure.
But, you know, just knowing the type of clients that you give me as far as needing that mitochondria repair, you know, looking at, you know, obviously the nutrition, but the muscle mass, and then also the metabolism, making sure people's insulin resistance isn't to the point where they, you know, it doesn't matter what you're doing in your office, that if they're insulin resistant, they're never going to be able to have that metabolism to create that energy so that you can get them stronger.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's a confounder, right? You see someone who is, by all definitions, putting in the work, but yet their muscle is still not sensitive to glucose uptake. And I don't fully understand that. Maybe you have some theories, but, you know, I have clients that go to the gym 3-4 days a week, and then they come to see someone like you, and their insulin numbers and their A1C is not good. And it's hard to understand sometimes.
Well, a lot of how I explain, you know, when I'm meeting with the patient for the first time is, you know, every cell in our body needs glucose, but when we get too much glucose, that's when things, you know, again, kind of that we're meant to be at a set point. We need homeostasis. We need balance. We don't need high. We don't need low. We need to be right at a homeostasis place. So when we get that insulin resistance and that glucose can't get moved into the cell, that is when they can't put on muscle mass, right? Because it's just that energy expenditure is just being wasted. It's not being utilized. And, you know, going back to that 20-minute walk after lunch and dinner, it's huge for people, just driving that glucose into the cell. And then, you know, looking at, you know, why some, you know, going back to that in-body, you know, you see them putting in the work and they're getting a little bit of body composition, but we're just not moving that dial from muscle percentage like we want. A lot of it has to go back down to those basics. What does your food look like? What is your movement? What does your diet look like? Making sure they're eating a very low inflammatory diet, low in sugar, processed foods. You know, I always say, you know, if you have to open up a bag or unwrap something, we probably shouldn't be eating it, right? Like truly eating whole foods. If it's not picked, pulled, or killed, probably shouldn't be eating it.
Absolutely.
So just going back to your, you know, transitioning from the elite side to now, I mean, I know you do a lot with hockey still, so you're still definitely in that elite realm, but what is your approach different with those clients versus someone average like me that, yes, I'm active, I'm in shape, but I'm obviously not an elite athlete?
Sure. I mean, I think the theories are the same. It's just meeting your patient where they're at that time. You know, with my elite athletes, they're just at a different level, so I can enter the system at a different place. I'm still thinking of the same concepts that we talked about, but I just have a little bit more freedom to move the needle because their body's just so much more responsive. I wouldn't sell yourself short. I think you do a great job, you know, with your physical health. But, you know, let's say in your case, with kind of the repetitive nature of your job, sometimes those trigger points, that muscle tension, you know, that is just something that needs to be dealt with right then and there. And we have to come up with a strategy to give you some tools to kind of fight that off so that you can get through some of that, you know, people call it tightness, right? But it's just a sense of like your body's just not moving the way you want it to move. So in that case, what we really rely on is these early phases of motor pattern development. I just need you to move a little bit more efficiently. So therefore, when you really ramp up your volume volume of movement, we know that it's not detrimental to the joint system and just sending you back down into this negative spiral of, oh, I felt great for 2 weeks, but now I have neck pain again, or whatever that might be.
Yeah. So what is when you have a client that comes to you that is moving, maybe not moving enough, like what is enough movement in your opinion?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. We lean on in-body as well, as soon as we can and as much as we can. But what enough movement means to me is just like what you keep saying, is that we can maintain that set point. For some people, if we're really dealing with a hardcore glucose problem, they just have to move a little bit more. We have to make some dietary changes, but even these micro doses of fitness just to be a little bit more regular. Some of our athletes that are a little bit more accustomed to movement can chunk up that movement into larger pieces, like a 2-hour training session, and their body's going to recover from that fine. But if we take someone that's metabolically unhealthy and put them into like a HIIT class or a booty burn type environment, they are not going to recover well from that. And they're going to have a negative association with fitness, and now we've lost their interest. Like fitness can be really addicting if we get clients addicted to it. Yeah. We can't just be constantly bathing them in acid and expect that to be a pleasurable experience for them, let alone the reality that putting a bunch of lactic acid into a muscle creates an abnormal motor pattern. It just does.
It does.
So we really have to pay attention to the volume of exercise. I know that doesn't quite answer your question. No. It's just a difficult one to put a number on.
I agree.
But I need my clients to be able to pretty much move every day. So if I'm doing too much to where they can't do what I'm asking them to do every day, we got to back it down a little bit.
So when you're dealing with the new client that has some injuries, has some pain, what do you recommend as far as nutrition and supplements? Or do you really just focus on food?
So I think in the spirit of supplementation, I have taken an approach to looking at protein a little bit deeper. I like to look at actual amino acid function. And so in this case, I'm really bullish on leucine because I really want to keep the muscle growing, or at least keep the process of muscle growth throughout the entirety of the day. When I first started coaching nutrition and wellness, I would just talk about total volume of protein intake, which I do think has absolute value, but there are several clients that have, whether that be a schedule restriction from being a parent or their job doesn't really give them the freedom to eat as much as they would like, specifically like our law enforcement, right? They're stuck in their car. Sometimes they don't want to go into a gas station to heat their food up. So in that case, I just leverage leucine or essential amino acids. And I try to explain to them like, maybe this isn't the 1 gram per pound of protein that we would like you to take in, but you're at least covering your bases on essential amino acids that keep the body functioning. And in that way, we can keep these metabolic processes rolling in the absence of the quality food that we want them to get to. Most recently, I have been sampling just pure leucine, just not even an essential amino acid, just leucine powder. And first and foremost, it tastes gross. No, it is disgusting. Yeah. But my mind is wrapped around a few of my current clients that I have that really, really want to make a change, but their life is not allowing them to eat at the frequency in which I would like. So my solution for that now is to take a deeper look at what are the amino acids that keep the engine running, and we really try to leverage those, leucine being one that's essential. We always, like methionine is good, because then we get the glutathione going, So I have recently taken more of a microscopic look at protein and leverage amino acids heavy.
So you make me happy because I have the perfect supplement for you. It's Leucinergy, and it has leucine, resveratrol, and the vitamin B6 with it. So I will make sure you get a bottle of that. Because so going back to your point about that female that walks in, that's doing the work, but you're just not able to metabolically make that change. Leucine and resveratrol will be that driver from an AMPK activation as far as from that cellular adaptation that needs to occur so that we make the cell less insulin resistant. So I will make sure you get a bottle of that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I appreciate that because this leucine powder is killing me right now.
Yeah. And so what is your take on, do you recommend people that so we all know as far as autophagy, as far as killing off bad cells and fasting, I think fasting took on this crazy craze, which I'm not saying is all negative, but I do think too much fasting can absolutely be harmful to the cell because it goes back, we need to be in a state of balance. So when you have clients ask you about fasting, do you even recommend it or what? And then I'll tell you my approach.
Sure. So I was part of that camp. I intermittently fasted for a long, long time, pretty successfully, I would say, from a personal experience. But now, back to our conversation about looking at these amino acids that drive the bus, I don't like my clients missing that morning meal. I would really like them to at least start their day with the appropriate amino acids and, maybe a little bit of fat or carbohydrates, depending on where they're at. And then if they want to fast for the majority of that day, I'm okay. But I've recently become a little bit more apt to prescribe midday fasting as opposed to skipping breakfast, just because I think I've noticed in myself and in my clients, when we start the day with the appropriate amino acid profile, start with some good vitamin C especially, then we have more of the machine running throughout the course of the day. Then we can absolutely cut calories down and let the body go to work. But what I believe now is that if we don't provide those initial kind of starting moments for the engine, it's just not going to run. Of course, they're not eating food per se, but the body's not really working. It's just in this state of survival where I want to get them started right. And if they want to skip meals during the day and then have a really good quality dinner, that is my current view of fasting.
Yeah. Well, and I always, I tell people front load your day with protein because you will have, I see high functioning individuals as far as, business owners, doctors, attorneys, people that need to be functioning at a very high cognitive level. And I was like, if you will front load your day with protein, you're that 2-3 o'clock that everybody deals with, it's not going to be there. And, my approach with fasting, and again, I'm not an anti-faster. It needs to be done right at the right timing, the right proportion. But I say, from a 14-day span, day 11, 12, 13, and 14. 11th day, you go at 25%. Day 13 and 14, 12 and 13, you go at 50%. Day 14, you're at 75% of your, and then repeat that cycle basically every 10 days. There's been a huge amount of research. A physician that I follow very closely, Dr. Seeds, that I'm part of his Seeds Scientific Research and Performance, he's presented a tremendous amount of data, what that does, not only from an athlete perspective, but just also the average American.
And there's so many great ways to do it, my wife and I have adopted a quarterly 5-day fast, right? That just works for us as far as we kind of do it together. And, it's I think a great way to reset the system. But with athletes, I think you're right. I think maybe periodically getting into a little bit of caloric restriction just to let the autophagy kind of, clean out the garbage a little bit has some significant value. And like the fast mimicking diet, that's a pretty good one. I think it works well. It's not no cal, it's just low cal with very specific recommendations on proteins and fats. And that seems to work very well in the same way that a hardcore fast would work.
Yeah. So wrapping up, I've become fascinated with the chiropractic world just because, I can tap into someone's body all day long from a cellular perspective, but if it's not moving, I will never move the dial. Same thing for you. You can get a body moving, but if they're, metabolically imbalanced, you're not going to see the results you're wanting to. And then that's when, us as practitioners, we get frustrated, right? Because it's like, what are we missing? What have we overlooked? So how do you feel like, how can those two worlds merge better together? As I was sharing with you, I've been in this cellular space for, 14, 15 years. I used to rarely see chiropractics at conferences and but now, there's more and more of you guys there. And I love the aspect because I think we've also realized, from my perspective, the importance of movement and to move well. So like how, if you could have that perfect world, how would you merge those two?
Well, I think the best way for us to merge is to appreciate that we can't be experts at everything. You know, like I know what I'm good at. I tried to get good at reading labs. It's just not my thing. And so I love working with people like you. And there's some great providers in the Albuquerque metro area that can contribute to that metabolic health piece. And it's just about not internalizing all of those aspects of patient care. You know, and for me, I find value in figuring out what I think needs to happen from a physical movement perspective, and then layering in some really high quality labs to see what I'm missing, whether that be systemic inflammation, nutrient deficiency, you know, just improper hormone balance, because as we both know, that's crucial. And then I have really loved layering in the peptide sciences as far as moving the needle faster and getting through those breakthrough moments where we need to add muscle mass and getting those growth hormone release agents kind of working for our patients to kind of get over the hump of getting that muscle to start to work and grow again. Now that's just two hands shaking for the same positive reason. But ultimately, if I try to do all of that myself, I don't have enough time in the day. I don't have enough brain space to be good at all of that. And so just co-managing with someone like you or another qualified professional that is good at looking at lab values and not completely overwhelming the patient with 50 changes on the first visit. It's a slow build on both sides of that coin.
Yeah. So I always like to leave the audience with like a take-home message. So what is that take-home message that you try to make sure your clients, when they're leaving your office for that day, they understand?
One of the things I try to really get them to understand is what should be the response to movement or the response to exercise. Kind of like we touched on before, movement needs to be prescribed and done in a way that it can be done every single day. If we are training so hard that we cannot really train again the following day, we're missing the mark. And that is hard for some people to appreciate. Like a lot of people get into the gym and they just want to leave it all on the gym floor and they can't quite function at the level we want them to. So I guess the overarching statement is recovery. And recovery means to me that you are managing your nutrition, you're managing your joint health, you're managing your sleep health, and you are looking for stress markers. Like what stresses you out and how can you fight that off?
Yep. Exactly. Well, I appreciate your time today, Dr. Gary Bowman, and I truly value our relationship together.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yep, anytime.